Obviously, like I was saying, some really good write-ups this week. The news broke yesterday. We'll get it started here. Bo Davis leaving LSU to go join Kellen Moore's staff in New Orleans. How big of a deal is this for Brian Kelly as they get into probably his biggest season at LSU?
This is a huge deal. I mean, they have had so much instability at the defensive line coach job for really a decade, but I think in particular over the past 5 years and throughout Brian Kelly's tenure too. I mean, I bring all that up to note that it's not just been a Brian Kelly problem. That this has been going on at LSU for a long time, where they just have not, since Brick Haley from 2009 to 2014, haven't had somebody at that spot for more than not even 2 calendar years. The only one who's really been in there for 2 full seasons is Bill Johnson from 2019 to 2020, and he came in, remember, at the start of spring preseason practice in 2019. So in 2023, obviously, was particularly chaotic, and so now for the 4th time in his 4 years at LSU, Brian Kelly is going to have to go find a different defensive line coach. And it is my understanding that Kevin Peoples will be able to oversee the whole position, edge rushers and defensive tackles, during the spring and kind of in the interim period here while they search for a replacement. A bit unclear how quickly a replacement could get in. So, in the meantime, Kevin can do it. But I don't think that's their plan long term moving forward. I think they liked having a dedicated defensive tackles coach and then a dedicated edge rushers coach. That's a model that Blake Baker had at Missouri and then brought here to LSU. And I think they want to continue to have that. But they're going to have to go and find another hire a little bit later in the coaching carousel than you would normally like to. And it's somebody they chased Bo Davis before whenever they needed defensive line coaches. They finally got him last year, signed him to a very lucrative contract. But, I don't know his reasons yet really for why he left for the Saints. I'll be interested to hear what those are. Maybe we'll find out whenever the Saints make him, available to media. But it's certainly a blow to LSU because he brought in a guy who this is his alma mater, highly respected, good developer of talent at a position that you needed to kind of rebuild, and now you are having to search for a new defensive tackles coach again.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the timing of it. Obviously, that plays a massive part in the search. How big of a deal is it in this job search as they look for somebody to be the defensive tackles D-line coach, and the fact that spring football is about to start? You still have the spring portal window to open up as well. What role does that kind of play in this search?
Yeah, the timing definitely is not ideal.
Right.
It's for the reasons that you just listed. I mean, you're about to go through a spring where you need to develop some young talent and continue to make those guys better. Ahmad Bro and Dominic McKinley in particular. Jacobian Guillory isn't going to be able to do full 11-on-11 stuff as he's coming off his Achilles, but there's a lot of guys in that room who are pretty young who need to keep getting coached up. And so that's where it's good for LSU that they have Kevin Peoples, that he has experience doing this. But yeah, with the portal opening too, I don't know how aggressive LSU wanted to be in like the defensive tackle market in the spring, but it's not ideal at any point in college football when you don't necessarily have if you don't have your coach in place by then. And LSU could maybe get a coach in place by then. We'll see. The thing is, I mean, back in 2023. Like they went and they found Jimmy Lindsey after spring practice ended, and we don't know how it would have worked out with Jimmy Lindsey because he had that health issue. Like that would have been a good hire or not. So they hired him away from South Carolina right after spring practice. So it's not the end of the world in terms of the timing. Like it, I think they'll still be able to go and get a good coach. They have now, I mean, $1.35 million what Bo Davis was owed this year. And so you have that to work with, and that can be very attractive, and especially to get somebody to try to come to LSU, I think that they will, still be able to make a hire. It's just the timing isn't great when you're about to start spring ball.
Definitely. And to talk about that room, the defensive line room in itself, the talent there is something that grew almost exponentially with Bo Davis here at LSU. What are the expectations for that group, especially now with the changes? But what are the expectations for the defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, those young guys are going to need to step up. Ahmad Bro and Dominic McKinley, who got some significant snaps as freshmen, started doing some good things, but took some lumps too. And certainly, they need to continue to develop. Jacobian Guillory even. I mean, as a 6th-year senior coming back off of that Achilles, like he needs to continue to get better to try to maximize what he can do. You've got a lot of freshmen who are in that room now. Bo Davis signed 4 defensive tackles, and they need to get developed. And I think that's, they don't have a lot of experience when you look at that position right now. And so, they're expecting some players to take a step forward this year. That's kind of where they're at. And so it's going to be a critical offseason for that defensive tackle position. I mean, obviously the offseason is critical for everybody on the team, but that's a spot where you didn't really bring in a whole lot of transfers who you can just kind of plug and play. So you got to have those defensive tackles, those young guys develop and continue to get better in order for you to be able to improve your run defense. LSU's run defense the past 2 years has not been very good. I think it was ranked 12th, 13th in the SEC the past 2 years. And so that needs to change. And a lot of that starts up front there in the middle.
You mentioned obviously that LSU has not been the most active in the transfer portal, or if they are looking in the transfer portal for the second window. My question is, should they be concerned about maybe retention of their own room now that you see obviously the Ahmad Bro tweet that comes out where he was obviously affected by the news? And so I'm wondering if LSU was without a hire for a while. You obviously have Kevin Peoples kind of taking the president in waiting, I guess. He's I'll go to the war room right now. But with that, if they don't make a hire and the amount of time that they need to, is that a concern for LSU that maybe they don't have with the talent that was brought in by Bo Davis? Is there a chance that he maybe loses, the next guy won't have that same room to operate with?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, that's just the nature of college football right now, where, these guys, they have the ability to leave if they want to after spring practice. And if they go through the spring and they don't like the situation, and they can just hop in the portal, that's fine. So it could be a concern. I don't want to just say oh, everybody's going to leave, because I don't know. They also, I'm sure those guys have relationships with other people on staff, and especially with some of them, they're local kids Bro and McKinley are both. We just use them as examples. Are Louisiana guys, and so that's something that usually keeps you home. But we'll just have to kind of see how it plays out. It could be a concern. I don't know exactly how much of a level of concern that would be. Just because LSU will, I'm sure, do everything it can to keep them. But that's the nature of the sport right now. They can leave if they want to. So it could be a concern when your position coach leaves if they're close to that person. I mean, we saw it a couple of years back with, Mason Smith leaving, and part of his reasoning was the uncertainty around the defensive line coach when he left early for the NFL. So those things do play factors, but I'm not sure exactly how it'll affect the room.
The other write-up that you got done this week was talking about Harold Perkins and Whit Weeks and kind of their injury journey as they're getting ready for summer and fall, and they won't be a part of spring. How big of a factor will that play that they won't be able to be a part of spring football, just kind of in the continuity of this defense?
Yeah, you obviously would prefer to have them out there, but they're also veteran guys. And I think Whit in particular, to where I don't know that it's a huge deal that Whit Weeks won't be out there fully practicing. I would expect we see him around on the field, maybe in that way, his voice can still carry a lot of weight. He's one of the leaders of this team. And we've already seen LSU put out videos where he isn't necessarily training, but he's with the other players while he's training. And so because he's already had so many snaps last year, I don't know that that's necessarily a big deal. But Harold not being out there is, it compresses the timeline that LSU has to get him ready to play that star position. I think they would probably, you'd prefer for him to be out there, certainly, as you kind of work with him on that spot. He's got experience playing something similar to the star at strong side linebacker in 2023, and even sort of part of last season before his injury. Those roles can have similar responsibilities in the defense, but that's definitely something that they're going to have to kind of work with him on mentally, and film rooms and things like that. In the meantime, while he continues to get his knee stronger, Brian Kelly said that Harold has started doing football related movements but he's not at a point where, he had an ACL injury in the September, so it's not at a point where he can come back and fully practice here in the spring. But they are Brian Kelly was really optimistic that those two guys will be fully cleared in June, and then gives them basically 8 weeks to get their conditioning up, and then all of preseason practice to work with them in the middle of the defense. And so he wasn't concerned about that part of it, but obviously you'd prefer to have your guys out there if they could be.
And with Harold Perkins continuing, obviously there was a lot made of his body changing to be able to play the inside part of the linebacker role, where I think you even did the write-up on how he was able to gain weight and what he did to do so. And I do wonder now, with the injury and having this timeline, do you think that you see a different version of Harold Perkins to where he looks kind of back to that freshman season where he's a little bit slimmer and moving around a little bit more, as opposed to trying to add weight to play in the middle?
Brian Kelly mentioned his weight when we spoke a little bit further about Harold. I was, Kelly's comments on that.
Brian Kelly knows how to lose it now.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. All the biking and all that sort of stuff. But he mentioned that Harold was still kind of in that 225 range. But I think that they think he can kind of hold that and still be what he needs to be as a star in that hybrid position. I don't think they want him to like slim back down necessarily to play the star position. Maybe over the course of the offseason that changes or something. But Kelly mentioned he's still in that sort of 225 range after he put on that weight last year. I think we saw it when he, in moments, when LSU actually blitzed him and he was able to kind of move around in space, that he still was moving around well in space. He was still fast and athletic, even at that weight. But that I think for them, with that star position, asking Kelly about, okay, so why is he now moving to this after he spent all of last year trying to get him to play inside linebacker? He's indicated that they sort of realized like having him get caught up in the wash just isn't what he needs to be, that he needs to be able to move around in space, play out on the edge and in sort of on the hash, and be able to just run and try to make teams block him with wide receivers and tight ends and running backs instead of 330-pound offensive linemen. Because unless Harold put on a lot of weight, he's just not going to have that size, and it's maybe not in his skill set to be able to take on those blocks. So they decided in conjunction with Harold that he was going to move to that star position this year.
Yeah, and with him moving over to the star position, what's a name in that linebacker room that you kind of expect to step up and kind of fill a role next to Whit Weeks back there in the defense?
I expect to see a lot of Devon Keys because that's what we saw at the end of last season. Now, is Devon a straight middle linebacker? Is Whit a straight middle linebacker? They didn't play that last year, really. Devon kind of was at that strong side linebacker position, which is sort of kind of a star spot last year toward the end of the season when LSU was using that 3 linebacker look. So maybe a lot of West Weeks too. West came back kind of for that purpose, to be able to provide some experience in the room, and he's got more of the size of a middle linebacker, kind of like Greg Penn had last year. He's not necessarily, I think, as fast as his younger brother, or maybe even as Devon. They have different skill sets, but so it'll be interesting to see kind of how LSU plays that, where they don't. Where West is probably the true middle linebacker, but Devon has shown so much promise. We'll get to see a lot of them, both of them in the spring. I would imagine that West and Devon are getting a lot of those first team linebacker reps with Whit and with Harold out. And so those two would be, excuse me, got something in my eye. Those two would be names to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and you bring up spring football and getting to see them. What are some other names that you're looking forward to seeing out there as spring football gets started in about a week or so?
I can't wait to see DJ Pickett actually get in action, because we only saw this little glimpse of him in the bowl game. When we went to a bowl practice in Houston, and they're at Houston Stadium, and DJ was just off to the side training with Jacoby Stevens and by himself in that setting. And so for him to actually see this 5-star who could maybe start day one
Right.
at cornerback, out there getting reps, going up against these receivers that LSU's brought in. I'm excited to see him, and also all these transfers. I mean, every single one of them. LSU brought in this transfer portal class to transform this roster, and to actually get to see these guys start to practice, how they fit into things, how fast really are these receivers, that kind of stuff. I'm excited to see all of them as well, because a lot of new faces, they're going to have a big impact on the team next year.
Yeah, and you also did a write-up on LSU's spring game. What are you expecting some of those changes to look like? Obviously, LSU's still going to have one, not be like Nebraska and those other schools that are canceling them. What are your expectations for what that's going to look like?
Yeah, not fully clear what the changes are yet. Brian Kelly wouldn't go into those details as to what it is that he's going to do differently. But I think maybe let's start calling it a spring event of some kind instead of a spring game this year. He said there's going to be live action, but didn't necessarily specify what that means. And I think they're just kind of in this transition and trying to figure out, okay, what is it that they want to do? What do they want to show? Because Gelly did say they want to show like DJ Pickett and give people a chance to see these players. But is it going to be in like a spring game format? I don't think so. And so we'll have to kind of wait for them to come out with more of those details. There will obviously, there's still going to be something to watch on TV. I mean, the SEC Network wants programming, so they're probably going to want these teams across the SEC to have something. But is it like a full-on Ole Miss Grove games type deal? I don't know that they're going to go to that extent necessarily, but I don't know that they're not going to play the traditional spring game. I don't think either. So somewhere in the middle of the